Hi, David. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, John. And it's a pleasure to be with you here today to talk about books.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to have you. We will be talking about your books. I see that there is at least three of them, and I know you're working on some more.
Yes.
But before we get to the books, tell us a little bit about yourself, your backstory, who you are, where you're from, and how you got to the point where you wrote these books.
So I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in the shadow of the steel mills. So this would have been in the 40s when the steel mills were belching forth all the smoke and toxic waste that we breathed in. And I lived there for 29 years before I moved on to Arizona and completed 2 degrees at the University of Arizona. And one of the degrees was in counseling, and that was where I discovered that I absolutely loved doing work around people's careers. And so that's what led me to the book that we're going to talk about today, one of them. And now I live in Oregon, Bend, Oregon. So it's quite a difference from Arizona. And in between, I lived in California. So I worked my way across the United
Mm.
States from the East Coast to the West Coast. And now it's like the Goldilocks complex, too hot, too cold, just right.
You found your spot. That's good.
I did.
That's great. Are you retired now, or are you still working?
I am still working. I'm very actively involved with doing career counseling and career coaching for people, writing my books and promoting those, and then speaking on podcasts such as yours.
Okay, good. We live in a time when career coaching is vitally important. Gone are the days where someone gets a job out of college and stays with it till 65. So there are people who, most people have to transition, find a way to transition their skills one to another. I'm one of those people. Well, let's get right to it. What's the
All
first
right.
book you wish to talk about?
So the first book actually has a new title from when it was first printed. This one is called Out of Work, Not Out of Worth, Navigating the Emotional Side of Job Loss. So we talk often about, well, here's how to write the perfect resume. Here's how to ace the interview. Here's how to write a cover letter. Here's how to network. So those are all valuable aspects of the job search. But what I wanted to do was focus more on the psychology behind job loss. And since my 1 degree was in counseling, it just was a natural segue into doing that.
Hmm. What would you say is the main reason for job loss these days?
Oh, I don't know if there's just one reason. What we find is, for instance, in Silicon Valley, where I was living before I moved here, what was happening was there was a major shift in technology. And so a lot of the jobs that people had in the big companies went south. So those people are now in job search mode thinking, well, talk about job security. I'm in technology. There's always going to be technology, so I'm pretty safe in what I'm doing. And now I'm finding when I do webinars, the majority of people sitting in those are people from the technology background. So part of it is, I don't know if it's due to the fact that AI is becoming more popular as a tool, and so that's affecting the work that people do. There's also the idea that this is an opportunity for people these days, probably in Canada as well as in this country,
Mhm.
of now that I'm out of work, maybe it's time for me to really discover what I have a passion for. Not what I think someone else thinks I should be doing, but what truly brings me pleasure in life. So
Mm.
it's a time of introspection and reflection, and people are making shifts in the work that they do. As you told me that you did, and as I did, I was in education for 34 years and said, you know what? I'm done with this chapter in my life. It's time for me to look at doing something else. And I've always, like I said, enjoyed the career coaching, the whole aspect of why people choose to do what they do, and then broadening that. Mhm. So these are skills that you've developed over time and probably are pretty competent at. And it's taking those skills and applying them in a different occupation. So my background was in education. So when you think about it, what I'm doing right now is a transferable skill, speaking about a specific topic. So putting together webinars, absolutely a transferable skill because I had to create lesson plans as a teacher. And I say to people, and I'll actually hold it up and say, see this piece of paper? This is my lesson plan for what we're going to cover today. So that's a transferable skill. And so any skill that you've developed over time that you feel competent in performing, it's asking yourself, what are other occupations that utilize these skills? That's what makes them transferable. So let's say if you were a teacher, okay, obviously part of teaching is training. So going into a company and becoming a trainer, that would be a transferable skill. It can, because when you think about it, there are some very famous people who do work that people would say, but that didn't require a college degree. And I'll say to them, think about someone who had really good interpersonal skills and was able to interview people, be very comfortable at doing that, and is now one of the richest women on the planet. And they go, Oprah Winfrey. I said, that's right. Now, think about someone who had homemaking skills and was good at sharing what those would be. Martha Stewart. So it doesn't always require a professional degree to have transferable skills. It's being creative in how you're going to apply them. And people will say, well, I could never make money doing that. And I said, well, here are two women who did exactly that. And they're doing quite well financially. So don't hold yourself back with those limiting beliefs that, oh, what I have, no one would want. Right. Well, I think what I've learned is in doing my research, John, that what transferable skills they need to be creating and developing are creativity, innovation, critical thinking skills. So these are all skills that are transferable and will be helpful in the times to come. They probably always have been, but even more so now. The other one is communication skills. You know, if you're just texting on your cell phone all day, I mean, that's great, but what are you doing to develop those communication skills so that when you're talking with other people, the message is clear? And I also have a workbook that accompanies it. With my background as an educator, what I did was to create exercises for people to do. And because this book focuses on introspection, an opportunity to look at your past and how that can help create your future. So with the workbook, it's all about activities, exercises. And each of the chapters in the books coincides with exercises that I created in the workbook. A little more extensive because the book itself is a lot of content, and you won't find that in the workbook. It'll be maybe a paragraph that introduces it, where there's a whole chapter in the book. So I wanted to keep it simple. I reference at the beginning of each of the chapters what it refers to in the book. So if people want to, they can go back and look at that. Oh, yes, lots of space for writing. And that's what you want because you can also date that entry. And then you go back and you can check your progress and how you've done within that area. So it was interesting, John. Back in 2013, I did a workshop for a group of job seekers. And the title of the workshop was Getting to Up from Down, Dealing with Depression During a Job Search. And as people were sharing, there was this wealth of information about their emotional experience tied to their job loss. And when it was over, I asked myself, what do I want to do with all of this? Do I just continue to do workshops, or do I take the content and expand upon it and use it as the foundation for a book? And I thought, which of these would reach more people? Well, obviously, it would be a book. So I did a couple of additional workshops focusing on the same aspect of job loss, the emotional side, and gathered more and more content that eventually became the book that I wrote. Sometimes I do. There were four main themes that I identified as a result of doing these workshops. And the five areas that were identified were the big one, self-confidence, then perseverance, acceptance, resilience, and commitment. And so I expand on each of these in the book, and then how you can develop these areas. Not about focusing on the negative, poor me, I'm a victim, all of that. It's just, okay, now it's time to take control of your life. And this is how you can do it. I think that the area, and it's not by accident that it's the first chapter in the book, John, self-confidence. I have, in coaching people, which is different than the counseling is more on what I want to do next based upon transferable skills and interests and values, all of that. The coaching is about, I have a job and I want to be better at what I do. And oftentimes what will get in the way of that is their level of self-confidence. So in focusing on that, I have seen a major transformation in clients, much more assertive in what they want in life and being able to express that. And then being surprised when they express it, they get it. So I think that's been a big part of the work that I do with people, is the satisfaction I get from watching their growth in these areas. Oh, yes, it's a dream killer, because people will say, well, I could never do that. It's just like we were talking about with these two women. If they didn't have the self-confidence to move forward, who knows what they would be doing in their lives today. And I talk about that in the book, which is the difference between humility and arrogance and how to delineate the two. So people say, oh, being humble, that's a negative. No, it isn't. Being humble is simply acknowledging the gifts you've been given and using those accordingly. Whereas arrogance is exactly what you describe, where, well, I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread, and you need to hire me because there's no one better than I am. Well, we know that that does not necessarily sell someone in terms of a position. Actually, it was published back in 2021. It took 8 years for me to get to the point where it was ready to be published. So there's where the perseverance and the commitment came in. So I worked with a writing coach for a while, and we did a number of rewrites on it until it was ready to be published. And then I self-published with that. And that is becoming more and more popular as a way for authors to get their work out there in the shortest time possible, because I tried the traditional route and they said, well, it could be a number of years before it actually reached the shelves. Whereas when you self-publish, as soon as you click on that publish button, it's ready to go. Yeah. I did hire people to assist with the formatting because they're the so-called experts in how you go about doing this. With the cover, it's done in blue with white lettering and the word not in big red lettering, out of work, not out of work. Blue, it said, was a color of hope. And I thought, well, that's exactly what I want to communicate with people. And it was interesting. A friend of mine just that I'm working on this new book with just sent me an article about choosing the design for your cover and said in nonfiction, it's important to keep it simple. Don't go crazy with an illustration. Just put text on there in terms of what you want to communicate to the reader. And I thought, well, I hit the nail on the head with that one. It's a very simple title that will capture people's attention. Yep. Right. And we address that, John, because one of the chapters on acceptance has to do with going through the grieving process. And that depression is one of the stages of grieving. And so pretty much expect that that will happen as part of your job search, because when I left a job or a profession that I did for 34 years, I thought it was going to be rather easy to get the next job. I was finishing a doctorate and I thought, oh, I'm highly marketable. Well, it took me over a year before I found that next job. And so, yes, there was the depression of, is this ever going to change? Is there something I'm doing wrong that is not causing me to be hired? I mean, the self-talk was not positive, and I talk about self-talk. And so we address these different levels of grieving and where people are in that. And again, that's in the book with activities to address where you are and how to move through it. Not that you ignore it, it's going to be there. And that's why I use the word loss as part of the title, because it is a loss. For many of us, it's a loss of identity because we define who we are by what we do. And when we're no longer doing that, who am I? And so now we have to reconstruct that. And it's not an easy job. And that's what one of the goals of the book is, to help people through that process. It will, I'm not sure if it'll be easier, it'll be more familiar. Okay. So they will have a pattern that they can draw upon and say, oh, I remember the last time I went through this. This feels familiar. Now, what did I do the last time when this showed up? So they now have some strategies, some tools to use to help get them through it a little easier. Um, and hopefully, what they've learned will be helpful in that transition. Not as much as I would hope they would be. Part of it is writing a book is one thing, marketing is another. And that's really where the sales come in. And I was never trained as a marketer. As an educator, I could certainly talk about influencing and persuading, but that's very different from marketing the book. So that's why I come on podcasts like yours and share that. And I do workshops where I talk about my book and how it can be helpful. In some cases, people will purchase it. In other cases, they'll say, oh, that's nice. Maybe I'll get around to that at some point. So they stay stuck in where they are until they get to the book, and people who have reviewed it said, gee, I wish I had known this when I was in the stage of looking for the next aspect of my career. It would have made life a lot easier. Yes, so that came about from a suggestion that someone had for me in a spiritual community that I belonged to at the time. And she says, you might want to start writing blogs about your thoughts on this. And I did. And that started back in the summer of 2010. So now, fast forward 14 years, and I'm posting daily blogs on this topic. And there are probably 1,000 entries at least on this, because every Monday I post a new blog entry, and then I recycle the other 6 days based upon, what I had 11 years ago. So it's not going to look familiar to people. And then I thought, what do I want to do with all this content? So I organized it, put it into categories, and created a journal, a book called Ponderings. Well, I didn't do 365 entries, in the book. That tends to be a rather thick book. So I did 10 topics of 28 entries per topic. So one of them is on acceptance, one is on gratitude, one is on thoughts, one's on feelings. So these are the various topics that I addressed and gathered that information about those various topics. It's based on a belief system. I suppose it could apply to just about any faith. And I was raised in a very strong faith that I no longer I don't practice it actively, but certainly, the principles of it. So it's really, if people are aware of something called the law of attraction, it's basically what we think is what we get in life. And so I do a number of podcasts based on that, and I'll say to people, it's working whether you believe in it or not. So if you don't believe it's going to work, guess what? It'll happen just the way you believe. You won't see any evidence of it. But my whole life, well, not my whole life, my life as of the last probably 11, 12 years is definitely proof of how it works, given what I've experienced in my life since my focus has been on that. Wonderful things happening that I probably wouldn't have been aware of if I didn't ascribe to this way of thinking. That book is a little more recent. I think that was done in 2022. But again, I was collecting all of the content for that since 2010. So probably I have enough content to do several more versions of that book. And yeah, and that was interesting because when it came to designing that cover, I knew what I wanted it to look like. And all I had to do was communicate that to the designer. So it was in education. So for 34 years, my career involved working with the blind. So my master's degree was in the education of the blind, and I worked in schools for the blind across the country during that time. And then after 34 years, I asked myself the old Peggy Lee question, is that all there is? And I thought, this is a time to reinvent myself. So if I'm going to do that, what was the work that I was doing that I absolutely loved? And it was the career work. And I did that as part of the educational program I was in. I actually created an entire program to help students who were blind identify what work they were suited for and then come up with a plan for how they could achieve that. And I'm still in touch with them, and many of them are now grandparents. So you can imagine how long ago that was. And many of them are saying, guess what? I'm doing what that plan said. Yep. And they say, I'm so happy doing it. And they amaze me, John, in the work that they do. It's just incredible. So this whole idea of, oh, people who are blind, what could they do? Well, pretty much whatever they set their mind to. They work in just about every field there is. Okay. So if you're an individual who is currently going through a transition in terms of changing the type of work that you do, and you're not quite sure what you need to do to achieve that, I would recommend purchasing my book, Out of Work, Not Out of Worth, Navigating the Emotional Side of Job Loss. It contains exercises related to 5 areas that people struggle with as they go through a job search: self-confidence, perseverance, acceptance, resilience, and commitment. All of these are key elements to what people typically deal with during this time in their life, which can be quite a challenge. So we turn it around and we make it a positive. This is a time for you to focus on you and what you truly want in life to be happy and feel fulfilled. So that is my talk about why it would be important to purchase this book. Good, good. I hope so too, John. Sounds good, because when the next book is out, it's about how to get out of being stuck in some aspect of your life. 5 keys. Yes, 5 keys for how to do that. Yes. All right, John. Okay. All right, you too. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching. If you like what I do here on Tell Me About Your Book, then please consider hitting that like button and leaving a comment. You could also subscribe and ring that bell because I release 2 episodes per week, one on Wednesdays and one on Saturdays. And if you are an author, I would love to hear from you. Until such time, keep on writing and be kind to one another.